Welcome to Block and Order, your one-stop legal shop for all things digital assets. I am your frozen host, Kyle Lawrence, and with me, as always, you can tokenize them, folks. It's regular in-person Moish.
Regular in-person me is back. They fired my avatar after a 1-week performance, so good. Humans win.
Well, he was going to the bathroom too much, and he was missing all the internal meetings, so we had to let him go. I'm sorry.
We ran out of tokens.
We ran out of tokens, right? I don't know how that happens with a billion supply. How you been, man? It's been a minute.
I've been good. I've been cold like you. This is the time of year where I rue having moved from Florida to New York in the wrong direction, despite not quite yet being a snowbird. But it's trying to stay warm.
I think that's better in July when you can't walk outside in Florida without melting into a puddle of your own sweat.
Yeah, I'll take the trade-off any day. I try and remind myself that, like around this time of the year, like it's okay. You're going to be warm again sometime.
That's what sweaters are for. Look at us. We're actually dressed like real people today.
Space heaters and blankets. So, usually we wear those things outside in Florida, but in New York, we wear them inside. That's part of the fun.
It's very fun. I do love it. What's going on in the world of crypto for you today, my man? It's because I haven't spoken to you in weeks. I don't know what's going on.
I haven't seen you in weeks, Kyle. Where have you been? Just get photos from Kyle on the beach. Like, all right, fantastic.
We can flash it up here. I'll send it to Abby. We could put it in the episode.
I know. Put the you with the tray of drinks up on the screen. No, I don't know, man. I'm reading the interwebs and watching the things come across the wire. Everything's good. It's all AI these days, Kyle. I mean, crypto's like moving. Clarity Act's going to pass. It's not going to pass. It's going to pass. It's not going to pass. But the AI stuff, come on, like every week is new. It's amazing.
It really is. And it's, the AI stocks are pretty much propping up the economy right now, which is always a good thing. But talking about, you mentioned Clarity Act, is it on, is it off? Obviously the big news that came out last week was Coinbase was pulling its support. And we have a very special guest coming up today. It's all going to come together in a second. We have a very special guest today.
Be very patient for this part. Yeah.
Be very patient for this part. I've been working on this all day. No. Ben Gray, the chief legal officer from Kraken, was our guest today. And I asked him point blank about what that means. And, I'm always curious about when you have somebody from an organization like Kraken, massive player in the space, second largest exchange in the United States. Everybody knows who they are. And I'm always curious as to how those exchanges and companies interact with each other, especially when they're, I don't want to say cross purposes, but they are approaching the same issue from different viewpoints. They're in different points in their business life cycle. They have different wants from the legislation. And I was kind of expecting him not to bash Coinbase, obviously, but to say like, listen, this is what we want. And if that's what they want to do, that's up to them. But he didn't do that. It was actually really refreshing to hear him talk about just how collaborative it is amongst his competitors, in effect. He mentioned a CLO like group chat that he has, which I think is the cutest thing I've ever heard.
I don't think he's the first guest, by the way, to mention the CLO group chat. I wonder if we have other guests on it. I won't speculate, but yeah, I agree with you. It's refreshing to hear his perspective and to hear the way that these different organizations approach this. And even when we were discussing Vitalik and the other kind of decentralized ethos that's also emerging as part of this conversation, they're part of the team, right? This is all the industry working together to create these products that unlock new things. And so it's cool to hear his perspective. I thought Ben was an amazing guest. And I thought also just, tying it all back together, as him and you and me, we're all thinking about the AI thing. And so that's part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, obviously AI, it's on the front of everybody's minds. It's everywhere you turn now. It's tokenization, which we talk about in the interview, but also just AI. And I'm just so glad to see such prominent entities really embracing the technology. I mean, obviously they are, you'd be foolish not to, but it's just refreshing to see people embracing these new technologies and viewing them correctly. Something in their arsenal they can use to do their job better. It's not something that's going to eliminate us all. I always mention that terrible Bruce Willis movie Surrogates. It's not that. I'm joking when I say that, everybody, but it's just good to hear. And as we develop, new products for our clients and help them develop their AI policies and how they can use it in their business, it's just great to see somebody who really understands the benefit of new technology and how it can help us all, take this lap around the sun a little more efficiently and more effectively.
Well, I love the reference to the Bruce Willis deep track there.
That
That's
movie sucks, by
fantastic.
the way.
But yeah, I mean, I guess an organization of this size could take two different approaches, right? One, we're already in like a pretty like edgy new industry. Let's just be defensive where we can. Let's not like, and or you could say, hey, we're already on the edge of this emerging industry. Let's make sure we're leveraging all the technology we can to really be ahead of everything here. And I'm just happy that he's on that, second part of that track there.
Yeah, I'm glad he's on our side.
That's right.
So without further ado, let's kick it over to our conversation with Ben Gray. So is it at least marginally warmer in DC than it is here? Because I'm gonna meet, dude. I have like a blanket here. I'm next to an exterior wall. It's like a meat locker in here.
It's uninhabitable. This is the first year where I've decided that I'm like ready to migrate south, and skip this whole thing. It's bad. It's really
Yeah,
bad. And
yeah.
the snowstorm is like people are starting to lose their minds. So that's
Ugh.
how you know you're in January.
Yeah, it's rough. Well, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
Old enough to start being a snowbird. How about that?
Because that's fair. That's a fair way of putting it. Because I about 60 hours ago just got back from St. John, where I didn't bring a sweatshirt or pants of any kind, and I'm just walking around the sand. And I come home, and it's like 14 degrees out, and my dog has to go out, and I slip a disc in my back, and I'm cranky, and I've officially reached that age where I've become
Yep.
my dad. Yeah.
Yep. That's
So,
what happens.
so when we moved to
I also
Arizona,
made the cardinal mistake of moving to California, and realizing that you don't actually have to live like this. And so
yes.
coming back to it was particularly masochistic of me, but here we are.
Yeah, I understand.
See,
I
I
also lived
came from
there.
Florida, where I
Yeah.
lived my whole life until about 11 years ago now. And I'm like, oh man.
Yeah, you start to wonder, like, why do people do this to themselves? But
That's right.
I don't know.
I just don't like
Masochism, I think, is
I
the
just don't
right.
like
Yeah.
myself. Yeah, it's pretty much what it comes down to. Well,
Exactly.
we can talk about the weather all day because it seems to be top of mind for everybody, but we must get down to brass tacks. And I would like to extend a very warm B&O welcome to an esteemed guest, Mr. Ben Gray, the Chief Legal Officer at Kraken. Ben, welcome aboard and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Of
Happy to
course.
be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. So you've been at Kraken for about a year now, just under a year, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm always fascinated when we have guests who are general counsel to companies the size of Kraken or what have you, or if they are on the Hill in a regulatory capacity. I know what my job is like, but when you walk into Kraken on day one, is it just like filling out HR forms and learning where the bathroom is? Like, what's the first thing you do when you get hired as CLO of Kraken?
Yeah, well, actually, so the funny thing about Kraken, we're probably most well known for our security. It's something we take incredibly seriously, and it's frankly like a huge part of why people like using our exchange. And um, that applies to employees too. I think it took me like three-quarters of a day to figure out how to log into my computer. It was like Fort Knox. So that was most of my first day. But yeah, it's like it's an interesting world we live in right now too. Kraken has been around for uh, nearly 15 years, but has been a global company, a remote first company from the beginning. So it wasn't one of the kind of COVID like transformers. It's always been like this, and so it's remote first, and they're kind of used to people joining that way. But that doesn't mean that I'm used to it. This is kind of the first company where there hadn't been any like in-person DNA. Even at Paxos, they had been in person prior to COVID, and so it was really interesting to jump into that and to figure out what it means to be a leader of a large organization that's all over the world, and so that's been an adventure for sure.
When you did start, if you don't mind me asking, what was your first priority? What was the first thing you wanted to tackle? I know that's a loaded question because Kraken has a lot of irons in the fire, a lot of things going on. And of course, it was right after the inauguration, which
Yeah.
represents a sea change in the industry. So walking in day one, Ben Gray, all right, here's what I want to accomplish in my first 100 days, something like that.
Well, look, I mean, it's a combination of things, right? I think the obvious thing is mostly just listening and trying to figure out what's going on in a new organization. I think that's just how I approach being a leader, and a leader of a big team is not kind of presuming that I know what needs to get done. So that was a lot of it, was just getting to know my team, getting to know kind of the biggest issues from the CEO's perspective. We had co-CEOs, and so getting to know them. I think at a macro level, you really hit on it, Kyle, which is that. Trump had been elected, and everyone kind of knew that that meant a significant shift from where we had all been. I had spent, the better part of almost 4 years at Paxos in a very much, I call it my like turtle years. It was very defensive. It was like kind of like go into your shell and just like hope that the industry can navigate through it. And all of a sudden, it was like the seas had parted, and everyone's like, okay, now what do we do? How do we like capitalize on this? How do we launch products? How do we clear the decks on things that had existed? Very publicly, Kraken had an open SEC lawsuit that it was fighting, and so obviously that was sort of very top of mind to me, was to figure out kind of what was going on there and how to clear the decks, which I and the team were able to do successfully, which we're really proud of. We always felt like that was kind of an unprincipled, unfair action. So that was kind of really huge for us to be able to kind of leave that historic baggage behind. But it's sort of like I said, it was a combination of kind of clearing the decks on that history, and also accelerating quickly into the future and figuring out, okay, where are the areas where we're competitive? Where are the areas that we have strength, and how do we capitalize on those things in this new world?
That's great. I didn't think about it till right as you were answering the question, but we're actually to the day exactly 1 year after the inauguration.
Yep.
And thinking back exactly 1 year ago, I'm curious, your thoughts of like, okay, we've been in this defensive posture. I mean, not just Paxos, but the whole industry and the people that advise the industry and so forth. All right, we're just playing defense, making sure, stay out of trouble, to, okay, this is a new, playing field, new opportunity. And thinking back a year ago and projecting forward, like what were you expecting might happen over the next year versus what has actually played out? And I'm curious, like, if you could compare and contrast what you expected versus what's actually happened. Is this like roughly in line with your expectations? Have things kind of like surprised you, and in what ways?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it's probably been better than we could have expected in a lot of ways. I mean, I think part of that was also just colored by how brutal those years were, and how we had sort of just become accustomed to the fact that like there was no there was no engagement. I mean, in the US,
Yeah.
I'll speak just from the US, like there was no engagement that was not enforcement. The door was just closed, which is, you become used to sort of being in this world where that's not even a possibility. And then I think what we've seen, I'll use like the SEC, for example, they formed the crypto task force. The crypto task force was actively inviting people to come in to talk through issues with them, to talk about how we can get clarity for the industry, which is ultimately a positive for the American people and for the markets. And so that was just such a sea change in approach that I don't think anyone could really wrap their heads around how quickly that shifted. It was really like, it was overnight. I mean, it was like you sort of went from like an agency that completely had their doors shut to an agency that threw them wide open. Um, and so that I think was and has been incredibly productive. We have been deeply engaged, and really have been encouraged by um, sort of seeking a clear regulatory framework that doesn't rely on enforcement as kind of the mechanism to get there. And we've always felt like at Kraken, kind of market integrity and effective regulation, right sized enforcement as well, are all ultimately good for the consumer. And they're not like, I think sometimes people look at industries and they say, oh, you just want to be unregulated. It's actually not our position at all. We want to be regulated because we ultimately think it's better for the market and for the consumer. And so that's been that's been great for us. And I think it's also the other kind of big thing I would say is that the US is now sort of getting its act together with respect to kind of catching up to the rest of the world, which had sort of left us behind in a lot of respects. And that meant that you saw a lot of talent leaving. You saw a lot of flight of kind of founding members who are going and saying, well, if I can go to Singapore, I can go to Europe and I can get clarity, that's where I'm going to go. And so we've seen a lot of that kind of flow back, which has also been great. So I think maybe to sum it all up, like, we felt really optimistic about it, but I think that um, it's been even kind of better in a lot of respects. Now, look, there's still a lot of road to hoe here, right? I mean, I know we're going to touch on this later, but market structure continues to wind its way through Congress, and it's something we're deeply involved in. And so I think there's more work to do, but we're really happy with the first year here.
You hit the nail on the head, and that's a perfect segue to talk about the Clarity Act. And thank you for bringing it up. Obviously, the news came out in the last week that Coinbase has withdrawn its support, due in for a couple of reasons, but one of them being the bank stepping in and making yield. You can't issue yield with respect to stablecoins, which is a problem for them. Kraken is the second largest exchange in the United States. And obviously, it's not a direct one-to-one in terms of your business models. And I'm not going to ask you to speculate as to what Coinbase's thought process is. But when you see Coinbase withdraw its support, and I know Kraken is very involved on the legislative front, where do you guys go from here with the backdrop of Coinbase stepping back? Not that they're like, we're walking away from the table. Obviously, you've said there's work that needs to be done. We don't want to let perfect be the enemy of the good with these things. But where do we go? What's Kraken's position? How do you view the next couple of months with respect to this legislation that's going to make its way through Congress?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we're incredibly supportive of the process. We've been at this for 3+ years, for longer. I think um, and Arjun, one of our close CEOs, is very public about this on X, that we really kind of believe you have to come to the table and to work through those challenging issues. And it's not a perfect bill. Like, I think I understand where Coinbase is coming from their perspective, but the interesting thing that I think people forget is the crypto sort of market and companies involved in the space are not homogenous. The business models are different. The way that they generate revenue is different. The regulatory structures, their customer bases, all of that is different. And this is a huge bill, very complicated bill for anyone who's sort of in the weeds on it. It's hundreds of pages. It's trying to touch on so many different aspects of the space that we're in. And so we kind of wouldn't expect that everyone would have perfect alignment at all points. And also, we would also expect that different sort of specific issues, whether it's yield on stablecoin or staking or DeFi or whatever it is, would be kind of more critical to different participants in the process. But that doesn't mean that we can't all sort of align around the fact that we all want it to move forward. We want it to move forward because, again, kind of going back to sound a little bit like a broken record, but we really believe kind of that financial innovation, investor protection, effective enforcement, all of these things are grounded in having regulatory clarity, which ultimately drives adoption and sort of growth of this market for consumers. And so it is the right thing. The process is right. The process is messy. That's legislation in the United States. But I think we're optimistic that as long as people stay at the table and continue to have these conversations, that there's a path. We really definitely believe that it's going to happen in 2026. Who knows exactly what the steps are to get to that point, but there's still a lot of will to get it done, and people are having those conversations.
Yeah, it's great that you're optimistic it's going to happen in 2026. And I hope you're right. But I do read.
I have to tell you, I was on a call the other day with a number of my peers in the industry, and it was really funny to see the spread of probabilities that people had of likelihood of passage. It just sort of goes to show you how much it's sort of out of individuals control, like just
Yeah.
because there are so many different things happening at the same time. But yeah, I choose to be an optimist here. So
Is there a pool, like a baby pool?
there was no pool, there were no betting. We're not engaging in betting, but
You
informal
have to go to the
pool.
poly market for
I
that.
was
Yeah,
gonna
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
exactly. That's exactly right.
Well,
I'm sure there
I
is.
guess
You could probably find odds on Polymarket or Kalshi. I would bet.
I think
Probably,
you're
probably
unfortunately
true,
right.
actually.
Well, I guess okay. There's one window. I mean, right. So time in Congress is valuable. Looking back a year, it's almost incredible that this much time of just the mind space of what legislation is going to be passed to that point, right? Of we couldn't have really imagined this a year ago. This is what Congress is spending their time doing, is engaging with the industry. And so, from that perspective, I think it's well worth being optimistic. But I think the flip side of that is if it doesn't happen pretty soon, and it's unclear if it will, I've read some analysts saying, well, just in terms of when it would actually get time on like the House, the Senate, or the floor, it might not happen until 2 or 3 years from now. So I'm just wondering from like a defensive legal perspective, okay, if it passes, you kind of know what that looks like. If it doesn't pass, is it just 2 or 3 more years of this kind of weird like how do you think about that from like a business planning perspective of this, or do you just we're being optimistic, let's just move forward that it's passing?
No, I mean we're definitely not sort of putting all of our eggs in that basket. I think, Kraken um, sort of quietly is one of the probably the most regulated exchanges around the world, the most regulated exchange around the world. We have licenses kind of across every asset class that you can think of. We across every sort of type of regulator, whether it's state, federal, international. We sort of have all of that, and so I think the way we're thinking about it is we've built this huge regulatory stack that we have invested a tremendous amount of time and effort in. We believe that there is sufficient clarity today to operate that business around the world as we have been. And what we're looking for is to sort of enshrine that in law. And of course, I don't even want to speak it into existence, but let's say it doesn't happen. That's not the end of the road, right? We are, as I said earlier in the discussion, we're engaging deeply with the SEC. They're working on rulemaking. There are paths for them to drive clarity through kind of administrative processes. Ditto for the CFTC, which we recently, acquired a couple of different entities that have CFTC oversight, and so we're deeply engaged with that regulator as well. And state money transmitter regulators in the U.S. And then, of course, we've got licenses with the Central Bank of Ireland and so many other regulators around the world that I think our perspective is this is one piece of our large global platform, which spans both crypto and TradFi. And so it's an important piece, no doubt, but we're going to sort of run the process and we're going to continue to build our business and scale it. And if this isn't the path, then we're going to find, another path to keep working towards clarity.
And
You mentioned TradFi. I mean, I'd be fired if I don't bring up tokenization.
Yeah.
Here we are. It's a natural pivot or natural
Yeah.
segue. Again, you're hitting my segues before I can even get to them. I mean, look, here we are, January 2026, and I can't turn around without hearing the word tokenization. It's coming at me from all angles. Now, it's great that we're doing it. It's going to make all of these financial institutions work much more efficiently. You're seeing the New York Stock Exchange is embracing it, and that's all fantastic. But is it going to be some sort of bubble, and is it happening too fast? Because from my perspective as a securities lawyer by trade, and I talk about this a lot on the show, I feel like you have everybody trying to get in on this. And when that happens, it's not the best structure around it, but everybody's trying to benefit from it. Everybody's trying to capitalize on it. Now, you guys are at the forefront and you guys know what you're doing. So how do you feel? What do you think is in store for the push to tokenization of real world assets in 2026 and beyond? And what is Kraken doing to kind of, harness this new process?
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny to hear you say that you sort of think the competition is like a potential risk. I think I see it differently, but maybe it's because we've been sort of fighting for this kind of mass adoption for so long. I would love to have people competing in this space. I think innovation kind of comes from healthy competition and from people sort of experimenting in this space. I think of tokenization as sort of combining the best of blockchain technology with financial services. So if you think about, I'll start with stablecoins because I actually think people forget that stablecoins are actually kind of the paradigmatic example of tokenization. You're taking the US dollar and you're tokenizing it. And it's the US dollar is the world's most popular financial instrument. And it's actually, if you live outside the United States, incredibly difficult to get your hands on dollars, and people want them because they're stable, because they're a hedge against inflation, because they're an easy way to send remittances at low cost. And so there's like a lot of value proposition to the US dollar. And so we've seen real world utility for people primarily outside the United States. You see stablecoin utility in the US, but it's largely to engage in crypto transactions today. I think potentially it'll be more valuable as like a payment rail. And of course there's yield. Um, but people often in the United States have a hard time wrapping their head around stablecoins because they're like, well, why would I want a dollar on the blockchain when I can just hold it in my wallet or hold it in a bank account? And so I think it's an easier to paint the picture of kind of the value proposition of that outside the United States. But if you like extrapolate away from the US dollar, um, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on Xstocks. So Xstocks is the platform that Kraken launched. It's the leading tokenized equity offering globally today. It's exploded in popularity. And if you think about it, like how cool is the idea that someone could be sitting somewhere, I don't know, pick a random country like Sri Lanka, and they want to hold exposure, financial exposure to a US equity. Like the fact that they can do that in a self-custodied wallet, that they can trade that outside of trading hours on the secondary market, and that they can build their wealth um, against maybe a company that they really believe in. Maybe they, for whatever reason, they love Nike or they love Tesla or whatever it is. Like that's an incredible innovation. If you take a step back and think about it, like these are walled gardens that typically have not even been exposed and available to lower income Americans, let alone people all over the world. And so, like, I think that just gets us so excited because you see, and me, I mean, you can hear my enthusiasm, but like you can actually see um, beyond all the bluster and everyone saying like, oh, I want to get involved in this and tokenization is the future. Like that is a very, very real world use case where the innovation that we're building is actually driving improvement for people's lives. And so it really kind of, you're taking crypto and the best of what is great about crypto, which is that it's open, it's permissionless, it's 24/7 access, it's instant settlement, it's self custody, it's unlimited composability, all of those things. And you're combining it with traditional financial instruments, whether it's real world equities, ETFs, you know, people talk about real estate, that's probably further along, but right, it could be anything. And you're mashing those two things together. I really do think um, there's a reason everyone's rushing into it. It's because people are realizing that there is actually tremendous utility to it. Um, just to go back, and I'll end here, but to go back to stablecoins for a second, the Genius Act passed, and then all of a sudden it was like every single institution, including every crypto and TradFi, was like, well, what's our stablecoin strategy? That is why we think the Clarity Act is so important, is because it creates this safety and this regulatory perimeter that then allows people to jump in with 2 feet with certainty. And so that's why it's important to us. But absolutely, I think we feel tremendously bullish about tokenization broadly.
Of course, that was probably the best answer I've ever gotten when I asked that question that way. And admittedly, part of it is a devil's advocacy kind of thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, you guys know what you're doing. I guess my trepidation, just stepping back a little bit, is you guys know what you're doing, but these guys don't, and these guys are louder, or have a big marketing arm, and that's always my fear with new technologies. It's just becomes a feeding frenzy.
Yeah.
And I hope that people like Kraken and the bigger players in the space are the ones driving the bus, not the riffraff.
Well, I mean, I think one thing that we have been really intentional about at Kraken is we're building an infrastructure platform. I think people often historically have sort of thought about Kraken as like an exchange, but actually what we're building is this sort of idea of super infrastructure. Building um, we're building whether it's liquidity or we're building access to exchange technology or yield or all of these different feature sets of the products are composable. And so to your fear, like rather than someone having to go out and build all of that, they can come to Kraken and they can say, hey, we want to tokenize this thing, but we don't want to build all the infrastructure, and we can do all of that for them. So that's why we feel like, Xstocks is a brand, and obviously it's something that we've launched, but you can kind of imagine different institutions coming and working with us, whether it's TradFi banks or fintechs, and saying, hey, we want to offer this. How do you use the pieces of infrastructure you guys have built, which is this global liquidity and all of the technology that we have, custody, I could name a million different things, and sort of how do you put all of those things together into something that works for the customers they want to serve.
That's great. And I think it's really fascinating you mentioning the Genius Act and then you having the background at Paxos and being in that seat and now seeing it from, the act's passed. Now we're implementing it. There's, everyone kind of rushing in. Stable coins in general, like I agree with you. It's the almost like the maximization of the dollar. Now we can export it everywhere. You're seeing even with all these geopolitical events, people in Venezuela, for example, can use, you know, they can use USDC or whatever else while their Venezuelan dollars get liquidated. So that's fantastic. So I'm wondering from your perspective, then, okay, uh, Genius Act passes. How does that actually on the ground change it and make it easier for you guys to implement your stablecoin strategy? And then I wanted to ask the same question, just comparatively. You mentioned other jurisdictions in Europe. You said you qualified for the MiCA license, and just how same question as you're getting these licenses in different jurisdictions, and you're seeing that okay, now this is kind of the baseline. Now we know from a place of confidence we can do business in this way in this jurisdiction. Just talk a little bit about like what that unlocks and the benefits of participating in those markets with that legislation behind you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think to take the first part of your question, like how does Genius help? I mean, I think the sort of knowing what the rules of the road are, it's interesting. My experience at Paxos, um, Paxos was a New York is a has a New York trust, and so or had a New York trust, I think, prior to transferring over to the OCC. But New York had done a ton of work to actually establish a stablecoin regulation framework, and so in many ways, the rules of the road that were established there were kind of adopted in Genius. And so I think what that did is for people who didn't have that New York overlay, all of a sudden it was like, okay, now we know the core tenets of what it means to have a regulated stablecoin, which is one-to-one backing, bankruptcy remoteness, all these different things. High quality liquid reserves backing the stablecoins. All of those things became kind of enshrined in law, and that meant okay, now we can drive adoption of the stablecoin that we're most interested in. We can kind of figure out how do we drive adoption of that? Like, how do we build it into all of our different partnerships? Are there different banks that maybe in the past wouldn't have been willing to kind of partner with us on that, and all of a sudden they would be, and so it sort of allowed us to very quickly um, integrate that into products in a way that we hadn't been able to before. And so I think that's probably like the biggest thing from a Kraken perspective. And, we'll continue to do even more there. On the international side, um, I think your question was sort of what is the benefit of having the licenses in the different markets, and sort of how do we capitalize on that? Was that the gist of it?
Yeah, and like thinking about the Clarity Act and like hoping this gets passed and that's going to enable market certainty, and then just comparing that to what a lot of people complain about is a bureaucratic, difficult to operate market in Europe, but they have the legislation there. They have a market structure bill that's been passed, and so you've now had about I don't know about 6 months into having licensure there. I'm like, well, is it still like is this just like, well, Europe's weird and slow and bureaucratic, and it's great that there's a legislation, but where we're doing what we can, or is that like, hey, now we've got like the same way as Genius, like, all right, now we're going to start integrating everything into our product because we have certainty.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think everyone's always going to grumble a little bit, right? It's sort of people don't want to be regulated and they want to be regulated. That's just
Yeah.
sort of the nature of technology companies, frankly, is that like everyone wants to move fast and there's always a little bit of friction that comes with it. But net, it's absolutely a positive thing, and I think we have invested a tremendous amount in our European market, our customers, our regulatory footprint there. We're regulated in both Cyprus with a MiFID license, as well as in Ireland, we've got MiCA licenses, as well as electronic money institution licenses and others, and we're regulated in the UK. And so it's a really core market for us, or set of markets. Um, and I think, the way I think about kind of the MiCA regulatory regime is that it is, a pretty straightforward disclosure-based approach to secondary market trading. It's putting out white papers. It's giving people like the proper disclosures on the assets that they're trading in. And it's a high regulatory bar, and one that we're very happy to meet. But like it's pretty straightforward. Is it perfect? Of course not. I think this is a complicated space to operate in, but I think we've found overall that you can operate effectively there if you're willing to really kind of go into the regulatory perimeter. And then, in the UK, they're deep in the consultation process right now, and so we're obviously very involved with the FCA and providing feedback there to make sure that the frameworks that they come out with imminently are also kind of aligned with what we're seeing around the world. I think I've talked a lot about regulatory harmonization in the past in various circles. I think like last year, for example, prior to when Genius was passed, everyone was talking about harmonization of stablecoin. And the reason for that is that crypto doesn't operate with traditional borders the way that traditional banking has. And I think it's hard for people to wrap their heads around that. But like if you have a USDC that's sitting in, or a USDG, let's say a stable coin that's sitting in the United States, and you want to transfer it over to like a different country across the ocean, you may be moving from one regulatory regime to another, but like ultimately the user isn't going to know that and isn't going to feel it. And so I think it's our responsibility to try as much as we can to work with the regulators to have like some semblance of similar experiences that ultimately trickle down to the customer, because from their perspective, they're like, well, I don't want to be asked 10 different things in this country and then 100 different things in this country. Like, I just want to be able to use my crypto wherever I am. And so that's I think how we approach it, is we're willing as the exchange to engage to get the licenses. We want to meet the high regulatory bar, but we want to abstract away the complexity as much as we can for our customers.
That's a great observation. It's something I encounter all the time as a securities lawyer, because we have clients who are all over the world. And
Yeah.
I try to explain to them, it's like, all right, well, if I'm offering this here and the investor is located here, what do I have to do? And it becomes this, like Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny with the chart and the string of it. That's kind of what it's like.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, and you've mentioned it a couple times, this concept of, one, you're working with the regulators, obviously Kraken being what it is, but there is a segment of the crypto population that's it's naturally attractive to people who lean libertarian, for example.
Hmm.
Like, I just want my crypto, I want to be left alone, I'm not harming anybody. And that idea of like, what is harm is what makes that impossible, in some ways. And what I've always sort of proselytized, for lack of a better word, is, people say to me, it's like, well, how do we do this? And I say, no, we want regulation. Regulation is a good thing, because if you're doing a real estate syndication in a traditional security sense, that's easy. You just do this, and that, and you're good, and you're compliant, and all the laws are good, and you checked off the boxes, and there's not going to be any problems. But without that roadmap, you're trying to fit square peg into a round hole. And part of what we do as part of our practice and as part of this show, and it sounds like there's some element of that in your job as well, is educating the people and trying to teach everybody, this is how it's going to work. It's impossible to be homogenous. We've had these talks with people all over the world. I don't see how it can possibly happen, even with something as borderless or nonpartisan as crypto. So I think you've made some really salient observations there, and I really appreciate it. There's no question in there. I just think it's interesting that you brought all that up.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I think, we like I'd sort of be remiss if I didn't say like we our core principles, and you sort of mentioned this like libertarian part of crypto. Like our core principles as a company are we're on our security, trust, and kind of a long-term commitment to that crypto ecosystem. So that's core to who we are. When I talk about regulation, it's not mutually exclusive with people having private access to their financial um, sort of well-being, and I think that's why we've been such um, advocates for the DeFi ecosystem. It's why we've built a lot of products in that space. It's why we want to open that up to our customers. Actually, if you look at, we have a couple of really interesting products that have been launched or that are launching, that are really designed to, um, again, I keep talking about this idea of abstracting away complexity, but like DeFi is complicated. It's like for the kind of the average user, it's hard for them to understand how do they access it, like how do they understand the risk associated with engaging in different protocols, et cetera. And so I think for us, that's another part of what we're excited about is like how do we bridge that, and sort of bridge all the different worlds of DeFi, of centralized exchanges, of TradFi. For us, the idea is like you have assets, they should be able to freely flow across all of those different platforms as you please. And this sort of concept of privacy is really core to what we do. Um, and so I guess again, not necessarily a specific answer to a question in there, but just sort of like a reflection on what you're saying, I think is my perspective is you can have all of these things coexist, and frankly, we should. And that's how you see the maximum value of crypto.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've been reading, Vitalik Buterin had a few posts over the past week. I think he's come out of 2026 with like a renewed fervor. Um, and one of the points he was making was that we need to take back ground in terms of self sovereignty, trustlessness, improving private payments, lowering barrier to entry for users to run full nodes, decentralized apps, and some. I think these are all things that, from like a decentralized Ethereum and then DeFi perspective, are part of the ethos of this industry. And this is something think a lot about is like, well, how do centralized actors like Kraken, like centralized exchanges, what is their role in the ecosystem to support those kinds of endeavors, and less like, okay, now we have federal legislation, which is fantastic, and that's going to benefit from the centralized services you provide, but how does that expand into the broader ecosystem and these other kind of crypto unique viewpoints?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, it sounds sort of like redundant, but
Yeah.
I think it's a core. Look, it's a core part of the ecosystem. I think
Right.
it would be a mistake to say that the Clarity Act is designed to kind of only bring a certain part of that into the regulatory perimeter. It's why DeFi has been such an interesting kind of flashpoint in the debate right now, because I think people, us included, feel really strongly about making sure that that continues to be a vibrant part of the crypto ecosystem. And the interesting thing about DeFi is it is like again just this tremendous, really interesting innovation. Like you're allowing people to engage in traditional kind of financial transactions without an intermediary involved. And that is something that is an innovation. And the fact that you can do that with smart contracts and you can control for counterparty risk and all of these different things that typically an intermediary is responsible for managing the risk around, but you can use smart contracts to do that is an innovation. And it would be a huge problem if we didn't also allow that to continue to flourish. So it's a core part of how we think about it.
I mean, it's
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I know, many people in your organization have been very vocal about those principles and the efforts that you guys are taking to do that. So we celebrate that for sure.
Yeah.
I'm all for removing the banks as intermediaries. I don't know if you can say that, but I certainly can.
I mean, look, I actually look, I was a banking regulatory lawyer. Like it's a space that I feel fondly towards. It's like I actually think that there's space for everyone to be involved in it, and there's an important role for all of the different parties to play in the financial services space. And I actually think what's encouraging is you're seeing a lot of traditional financial institutions are now looking at this and saying, actually, like this technology could be really valuable and interesting for our customers, and we don't have to look at this as sort of eating our lunch. It's just we need to evolve with it. I think about it a lot, not to go off on a tangent, but like as a lawyer, I don't know if you hear this from other people that you bring on, but like AI is absolutely fundamentally changing our profession. And I think you'd be really, really foolish to not like embrace that versus like if you're going to sit there and just say like, oh, this technology is going to eat my lunch or whatever, like that's actually going to be a losing strategy, whether it's in crypto or whether it's as a lawyer or whatever. Like you got to kind of figure out, okay, how do I harness this and how do I adapt?
You said the magic words. Did you see him like perk up in his chair? He got all excited. On a prior episode, we actually had AI Moish deliver a part of the.
No way.
Yeah, I did have my avatar.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's
That's
yeah.
really him though.
This is me. I think you can.
Yeah.
No, I think a lot about this, and I'm curious from your perspective. What role you think AI has in, from your perspective, right, in the role of a chief legal officer of a large organization. In, on the one hand, perhaps making certain processes more efficient internally, making the work that you do more efficient, the work people in your team more efficient, perhaps giving more decentralized legal kind of like people out in the field, like a salesperson now has things they can query and get immediate feedback about like legal boundaries and principles. On the one hand, right? So like internal legal operations within the company, but then also in terms of the way outside you interact with outside counsel, the way outside counsel may or may not be displaced or made more or less efficient by this usage. I'm just curious how you're thinking about that, just because it's all happening in real time, in flux, and changing from week to week, basically. I'm sure.
Yeah, it is a wild time to be in our profession for sure. I think so. My remit, so I lead our legal team, and then compliance also rolls up into me, and risk and internal audit. So I have different kind of constituencies when I think about this.
But they're all
And
AI now. Yeah.
well, it's like I actually give like such tremendous kudos. So like compliance functions have a large operational component in financial services industry. For people who aren't as familiar, you're doing a lot of anti-money laundering kind of reviews of transactions, you're doing filings, you're doing sanctions reviews, those kinds of things, KYC. And there's a heavy operational component of that. And I think we have done an unbelievable job of leveraging AI to really like sort of make that decision, make a lot of those decisions in an automated but auditable way, but and also allow for, it's not about eliminating people. I think this is the sort of red herring. Everyone thinks like, oh, it's about like we can just get rid of people because we're implementing AI. It's actually about shifting them towards higher leverage work. And so that's how we think about it, is like, how do we shift away from low complexity or from repetitive work and shift people to higher leverage, higher complexity work. So we've been really successful there, and continue to do more work there and really innovate. On the legal side, it's in an in-house function, there are some functions that are a little more kind of operational in nature. For example, like in a big corporation, you're executing tons of NDAs, like tons, and that's a very repeatable kind of form-based process. And that's something that you can use AI to kind of do a quick first pass of the NDA if it's coming from someone else or your own NDA, and kind of you can make some really great strides there. With the sort of the more like bespoke legal advice that you're giving, uh, you're still going to want a lawyer sitting there thinking about it, thinking critically, kind of weighing all the different pros and cons. But a lot of the research on these things, it's not going to be perfect, but it is going to get you 50% of the way there, which like in some cases is what you need to like start. And so I think that's okay to acknowledge, by the way. Like I think I think we all have to sort of recognize that. And of course you don't just take it and not double check things, but like absolutely there are moments where you just want to get a gut check, or you want to be able to get a very quick high level like sense of like, are you on the right track? And it can be incredibly powerful for that. Um, One thing I'm like really proud of, we've been pushing this across my whole team as like a real strategic imperative. And one thing that we've done that's really cool is we've created these custom GPTs. So you have like, for example, I created one which I call Clobot, the chief legal officer robot, and it's basically I trained it to think like me and to communicate like me. So I said, communicate in very direct terms, you know, don't overcomplicate it, whatever. Like I gave it a bunch of different rules and parameters. I said, this is your expertise, train on these regulations. Here's what you need to be able to do. And I ask you questions all the time. I'm like, hey, you're dealing with this thing. I'm like, it's this weird thing. It's like you're talking to yourself,
It's amazing.
but we like another great example, like I have a few really talented folks who are passionate about this, and we had someone who was going out on leave for a little while, and their expertise was in the regulations for a specific country, and we said, okay, well, we'll create a specific GPT, custom GPT that's trained on the regulations for that country, and so when the person was out for a few weeks, if a question came up on that country, we could go and ask the like the lawyer from that or the bot from that country
Oh, no.
and get like a gut check, and so like
Yeah.
there's some really cool, interesting ways to get around what I would call like people's initial reaction, which is, oh, ChatGPT, like it hallucinates and it doesn't know what it's doing and it's not trained on the right things. And it's like, yeah, but like think a little bit more critically about how to get around those things, and it can actually multiply the effectiveness of the people that are using it. And that's our goal. So lots more to do. And I think there's like, I'm sure I'm just scratching the surface on it, but it's definitely something I'm definitely a booster of it. I think like it's something we ask people about and
Yeah.
and we optimize for. We want people who are excited about it.
Yeah.
As are we. Yeah.
We can detect your passion for it.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think the thing I'm really excited for, and like it's awesome to hear what you're implementing, is like the collaboration among people using AI.
Yeah.
And the idea that like I have a well-informed client that already asked the 50% question and is up to speed and now wants to get into the weeds on like, all right, here's this really minor issue, which now I understand. Like I don't have to spend the first half of the call. Like, all right, here's like getting up to the same speed on like the basics. And then you can just like jump in and dive. Like here's where something, it's like, I think that part's really cool. And then the tooling around how both internal teams and like diverse, like cross part, like different inside outside teams can collaborate on different, it's like, that's where I think like it's really interesting. And there hasn't been a lot of like the collab space kind of discussion happening.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really exciting spot.
I mean, we
Again,
love
no question there.
No.
I'm like, no, I'm like agree, hard agree. I mean, like, I think adoption is like the hardest part. It's a skill, right? Like, and that's the other thing is people, um,
yeah.
it's like we are trying to graft our Google usage onto ChatGPT. People like if you haven't had even a basic training in it, your first instinct is to go ask it a question the way that you would ask Google a question, and like that's actually not nearly the most effective way to engage with it. So it takes a little bit of training and kind of people getting up to speed on it.
But it's a microcosm of fears of the new that we've seen throughout history. I mean, history shows us, I mean, people were afraid of cars. People are afraid of the internet. I'm not putting my credit card. Are you crazy? Everyone's going to steal it. And now, I mean, the thought of practicing law without the internet makes me want to cry. I don't even know how you would do it, honestly. I know, but my dad did it, but it sucks. This is 1,000 times better. And I would think that with mass adoption of the new technologies, of blockchain tech, of cryptocurrencies and stablecoins, AI is just another tool like that. And we have a lot of clients, even people that we work with, that feel about AI, as you were saying, I don't like this. It's fake. I'd rather do things the way I would. And, it's a new tool in our tool belts. And people should be at least open to seeing what the fuss is about, as opposed to just seeing the high profile things that don't work, the the lawyer who walks into court with hallucinated cases and that person got tortured. Yeah, well, but that's no different than if his associate gave him fake cases. Like it's
Yeah.
I don't see the difference, you know.
What's your advice for, either junior people that are actually joining your legal team or other aspiring lawyers out there? Like, all right, this is the new landscape. Everything is changing. Like, what should they do?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll answer that question in two different ways. Like for crypto lawyers, I think it's really, really important to be um, to deeply understand the products that you're advising on and that you're working with because they're really complicated. And I think if you don't understand them, it's very, very hard to meet your cross-functional partners and stakeholders where they are and to give creative advice. And so I think we have like an aggressive culture of what's called dog fooding or using our own products. And so I think that's like a big part of it. The other thing is you need to be up on what's going on and from a policy standpoint sort of be engaged in that way because the kind of like the products and then the regulation and the policy are all happening at exactly the same time. And so your ability to provide effective legal advice across all the different functions, whether it's employment law or whatever, is all of these things are going to be colored by how are the local regulators looking at things, what is the sort of policy um, like aura that's happening at any given time, what are the products, how are they operating, where are the innovations, and being able to kind of couple all of those things. So we really encourage like our lawyers to be engaged in the business, understand how the business works, understand how the products work, be engaged in the overall crypto ecosystem and know what's going on, and be sort of passionate about those things. In terms of like AI, I think it's about embracing it. And sort of being open to figuring out what like the best use case is going to be for you. I think I don't know that I've spent like a fair amount of time looking into like solutions and things that are out there. I think it's very early on the legal side, candidly. Like there's a few kind of leaders in this space. I'm not sure anyone has kind of emerged as like the killer app or the killer use case yet, but I think um just kind of tinkering and thinking about like the question I always ask myself is like, what do I hate doing in my day? And then like if it's something I hate, then like how do I have AI do it for me?
I love it.
It's incredibly, incredibly effective question. So that's my tip is like ask yourself when you find yourself like doing something you really hate doing, is there a way to have AI do it for you?
Or have Claude Code build a app that does it for you. It's like
Yeah, exactly.
the new
Exactly.
vibe of
Yeah,
the
or
week.
build
So.
an app to do it for you. Exactly.
Well, funny enough, I mean, you're in house, so you don't remember the hell of having to fill out a timesheet, but we now have an AI timesheet keeper, and it's the best thing ever that's ever been invented ever on the planet.
Totally.
For
Yeah,
sure,
it's like
for
the
sure, the
small,
killer
it's
app
like
for timekeepers. Yeah.
it's the smallest stuff. Like one thing that I find to be like an incredible time saver is I do a lot of interviewing and not having to sit there and take notes for the entire interview and like being able to actually focus on the conversation you're having with people and then have AI turn that into a summary of your feedback and the conversation is like a tremendous value add. So yeah, there's stuff all over the place.
You've been looking at what we've been doing.
Yeah.
Well, we only have a couple minutes left, Ben. Any final thoughts you want to share before we let you go? Continue conquering the world.
No, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think that, from our perspective, having strong partners with outside counsel expertise in these areas has been kind of critical to our ability to scale quickly and to operate globally. And so we always love to spend time with folks like you guys, and I appreciate you having me here.
No, we appreciate everything you've done in the space. We appreciate your time. And when the Clarity Act gets passed this year before the midterms, we will have you back on, and we'll give you your dollar in the pool.
I'll hold you to that. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. Ben
Thank
Gray,
you so much.
Chief Legal Officer at Kraken. Thank you so much for stopping by, man.
Thank you.
I wanted to let you know that we relaunched the Block and Order website, which was vibe coded by yours truly. I really love the way it came out. If you have any suggestions, let me know and I will tell Claude to make them. And you can go on blockandorder.com to see our latest episodes, our latest blog posts, and also the weekly docket, which features the weekly news that is most important to all of you. So again, love any feedback or suggestions for articles or guests that we have not already covered or interviewed. Thanks.
Well, that wraps up this episode of Block and Order. Very special thank you to Ben Gray, Chief Legal Officer at Kraken, for stopping by. He shared some just wonderful insights in the space. I know we've been very excited to have him on the show, and he certainly didn't disappoint. Remember that this show is meant for informational purposes only. Nothing on the show is meant to be construed as legal and or financial advice. Please consult your own representatives if you're going to take the plunge. Please remember that any assets that we discuss during Block and Order is purely for discussion purposes only. It is not in any way meant to be an endorsement of such assets. Please proceed with your own risk. Special thank you to OG producer Abby. Without her, this show would not be possible. So on behalf of Moish Peltz, I'm Kyle Lawrence. Keep fighting the good fight, everybody.
See you next time.